People that work in the wedding industry, have you ever seen a couple and immediately thought, this ends in divorce? Why? Story 1. I bake wedding cakes and cookies, but this happened before I was in the business. A week before the wedding, bride was talking about how excited she was to get married because that meant she could finally do C. What? Groom was confused and asked for more info. Bride was like, well, they say when you do drugs, you should do them with someone you trust. She planned on them doing it on their honeymoon. When he straight up said no, she threatened to call off the wedding. He said, fine, call it off. Wedding still happened, she gave in, but 3 months later, she took their 7-month-old daughter to a drug party at her sister's while the groom was working. He found out about it, showed up at the house, everyone was passed out, and his daughter was screaming and crying on the bedroom floor. He took her and left without a word to anyone, packed his bags, and never contacted the bride again. Story 2. Was working at a hotel during a wedding weekend, and the father of the bride and the groom were caught tugging one another by one of the staff 2 days before the wedding. We all had a bit of a giggle and assumed this was some sort of misunderstanding. There were weird ideas thrown around like, maybe there's a family tradition where they hold each other's D's while they kiss or some crap like that. Anyway, they bear and all still in good spirits and the wedding goes ahead. At 7:57 p.m. on the night of the wedding, I brought a bottle of champagne up to the room along with some other things we did for a wedding night. Normally before they check in, but they were already staying in that room before they got married. I was told there is nobody in the room and the groom is downstairs and the bride is supposed to be out getting photos or something. I knock, we had to even when we knew somebody was in there, then quickly open the door and walk straight in. The bride is bent over the chair with her wedding dress over her head, and the best man is pounding her from behind. I just left the champagne on the ground and left. One seriously effed up family, but they all tipped well. Oh, it sounds like they were giving more than just the tip. Story 3. I ran a fairly upmarket hotel and restaurant that sometimes hosted weddings, made a rookie error, and booked in a wedding for Christmas Eve. This should have been a warning sign, as it shows a pretty significant lack of consideration for friends and family, making them travel across the country on one of the most irritating days of the year when we'd all rather be at home with family preparing for the next day. They turned up 3 hours early, and the battle axe of a bride proceeded to shout at us for not being prepared, surrounded by her incredibly embarrassed but not unsurprised family. There were various other red flags throughout the night, but the main one was when the husband got blind drunk on whiskey and asked me to go to his hotel room with him and break him in as a married man. I politely refused. Story 4. Not actually in the industry, but I have helped out a friend with a few weddings. 2 of the weddings I could just tell they weren't going to make it. The first wedding, the bride and groom hardly talked the entire wedding. It was like they had nothing in common. And then later, the groom pretty much F's off halfway through and went home because, I quote, he was tired. So he just left his bride having to take pictures with the wedding guests on her own. He never came back that evening, so she had to greet everyone, etc. Funny enough, about a year later, I heard they're filing for divorce. Another time was actually last summer. Just before the wedding speeches, the groom went to go hang out with his friends for like half an hour, leaving the bride sitting there alone and delaying the speeches. Then, right after the bride and groom cut the cake, he, once again, went to go hang out with his friends and abandoned his wife. So she was left alone having to mingle with all the guests, and he made no interaction with her side of the guests. He stuck with his friends the rest of the evening. His wife basically had to go and beg him to come and take more wedding pictures. At one point in the evening, he actually went for a drive with his friend for about an hour, and his wife had no idea where he was. I mean, I get wanting to mingle with your friends at your wedding, but to not even mingle with your wife's family or friends on your wedding day seems quite rude. Yeah, I'm not even a big fan of weddings, and frankly think that people put way too much stock into weddings these days. But if you're having a wedding, you've got to be present and, well, just don't act like that groom, good lord. Story 5. I have a friend who is a wedding photographer, a rather busy and expensive one at that, so people usually book a year in advance. So she has a bridal book the wedding date and pay the deposit, nothing unusual there. The bride confirmed the venue, also booked and pricey, and had the general discussions with her about the style that she wanted, etc. They had regular meetings over the following months, but the groom was never there. A bit unusual, but not unheard of. So it's now 4 weeks before the wedding, and they have the meeting to lock down all the details, but still no groom. My friend asks about him, and the bride mentions for the first time that she isn't engaged. Okay, maybe she has a long-term boyfriend and is planning a surprise wedding? No, it turns out that she doesn't have a boyfriend or any guy in mind, but she prayed about it and God told her to trust that he will provide a groom for her. So, in the end, no groom magically materialized and there was no wedding. So in that case, the marriage lasted 0 minutes and we were all sure that it wasn't going to work out. In fact, at the time, we had some running joke about her meeting a guy on a date and asking him if he wants to go to a wedding with her next weekend. Story 6 was at a friend's wedding once. It was at the Justice of the Peace, when the judge or officiant came around to, if anyone doesn't believe in the union, to speak up or forever hold your peace, a loud "uh-oh" came shrieking from the back. It was my friend's 2-year-old son. Everybody was joking, saying it was a sign. Less than a year later, the couple got divorced. Story 7. Content warning. Self-termination. Skip forward 35 seconds to skip this story. I work catering gigs in Florida. The bride was being super mean towards the groom during dinner and the reception, like a sarcastic, "You should have known to do that already, dumb butt" tone. Our crew figured, yep, this is a short marriage. After the obligatory dances and dinner had started, the groom came up, tipped the DJ, the photographers, and then came over, tipped our crew way too much, thanked us very sweetly, and said he was going to skip away and drive down to the beach a few minutes away while the party continued. He never came back. Next day, we were told by the bride's family that the sheriff found his car, the groom's body, and a gun down by the beach. Story 8. I work in the industry, side hobby, and saw it before entering. Recent husband came to me, a total stranger to him, and asked what I would do if I found my fiancée effing her dance partner 3 weeks before the wedding. I just shook my head and walked away. 2 months. Story 9. I worked fine dining / catering for over 20 years, so I've worked lots of weddings and receptions. I once heard a bride at the reception during the toasts say that she actually thought she was asking out the groom's twin brother on their first date, and that might actually be cute, except she just kept going on. How the twin was more compatible, etc. Then she ended the toast with, "Well, as nice as you are, you'll make a great first husband." I was walking past the cameraman at the time, and you can hear me on tape saying, "Did you get that? Tell me you got that." I mean, maybe that was just a long-running joke of theirs? If not, holy crap, if I were the groom, I would just leave right then and there and get it annulled. And if it is a joke, what an awkward joke to make in front of all those people. I love it. Story 10. Not necessarily a divorce between the happy couple, but while working weddings one summer, I saw the best man and maid of honor walk out of the same bathroom like 10 seconds apart, so I've always wondered how that went over. Story 11. Many years ago, I had a side hustle doing cakes and would often get orders for wedding cakes. Long story short, the bride-to-be threw a full-fledged, stompy-footed tantrum, locking herself in my bathroom and refused to come out because the groom was unreasonably insisting on having a say in what the cake flavor was going to be. Like, I'd say through the door, "Get out of my bathroom," and all I'd get was a whiny, defiant little, "No!" If I recall correctly, she was about 22. Story 12. I am not in the industry. I have a story anyway. When me and my wife were about to celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary, my family let me know they had a pool. When we got married, for how long he would last. None of them had us lasting longer than a year. This year, we are going to be celebrating 19 years married together. We feel that after 2020, we are having the best time together and still best friends. The pot was never claimed. Story 13. I work in a hotel. I came in one night to find the wedding was already wrapped up. It was supposed to go until 1 a.m. and it was 11 p.m. because the wedding couple had a fight and she went home with mom. At another one, they had a huge rehearsal dinner which spilled out into the lobby. Everyone in the lobby found out that she hated his parents, she was pregnant, and she had no idea who the father was, and a few other things. Half the guest list packed up and checked out the next day. They still got married. Well, hey, if they still really loved each other, I could see that last couple making it work. But, work is the operative word there because they would need to do a lot of it for things to last. Story 14. All the effing time. You know how they say 50% of weddings end in divorce? I can pretty much predetermine who that 50% are going to be with about 98% accuracy. I bake wedding cakes for a living. I own my own bakery, but have also worked in a country club kitchen doing basically the same thing plus other pastry chef duties day of weddings. I've seen them both for the tasting/design consultation and on their wedding day. I see how they interact when they're just together, but also when under stress of the big day. I've seen everything. Lots of cheating, lots of drunks, lots of terrible mothers. One had a mama's boy who ignored his wife when they were supposed to be having their cake tasting to cuddle their mother and hand feed her cake. His mother was not supposed to be there, and you could tell the bride was peed. By the end of it, he had kissed his mother on the lips multiple times. Divorce. Have seen a woman effing and complaining at everything her fiancé said. Any suggestions he had for what he liked resulted in him being called stupid. Anytime she opened her mouth, he'd cower and flinch. Their cake actually got canceled like a month before the wedding, so we didn't get anything but the deposit even though we'd started baking it. First time I've lost out on money, and I've been relieved. Once had this arrogant D-head Turkish guy marrying into this Bangladeshi family. Bride was sweet, about 10 years older than him, and came from a fairly well-off family. Generally got the impression that this being a Turk/South Asian marriage was kind of a big deal, even though they're both Muslim, but since she was 30-something, they wanted her to get married, so they allowed it. Guy complains about everything during the planning process, especially over them not serving alcohol. Is generally a D to us, but is straight up cruel to her. Like at one point when we were meeting, I asked after her wedding dress, because South Asian wedding dresses are gorgeous. She's showing me this amazing dress, and he says straight up, I don't know why she picked that one, she looks fat and old in it. Every other woman is going to be more beautiful than her on her wedding day. He then shows me this dress he picked out, which isn't traditional South Asian style at all and is very Western and very fugly and basically makes the model in the picture look naked, it's so sheer. When she says something about how no mosque would let her in dressed like that and her traditions are important, he just sneered and said she should get over it, and her traditions weren't that important. Divorce red flags. Found out later they didn't last a day. From the way the servers tell it, midway through the reception, guy raises his hand to his new bride when she asked him a question about being drunk, and she flinched and turned away, protecting her face. He grabbed her by the arm and rips her around, peed. Her mother and aunt were standing 3 feet from her and lost their effing minds, realizing what must have been happening there. His response when mom started to lose her crap on him was to hit the mother. So in the middle of this very big 600-plus person Bangladeshi wedding, this 20-something outsider D-head no one wanted her to marry anyway, smacked a well-respected woman in their community. There was a brawl, the cops were called, marriage was annulled. Edit, because so many of you are asking, baking a cake in the weeks leading up to the event is standard. You bake the sponge, triple wrap, and flash freeze. Frozen cakes are actually much, much less likely to taste dry or gross because if you fresh bake, they'll be sitting out for days on end until they can be decorated and absorb whatever smells are in the refrigerator and dry out. Typically, we also will cover them in simple syrup after thawing, but before assembly, which is why bakery cakes are so much more moist than a lot of homemade ones. I've been working as a baker since I was 15, and this is very much the practice of every place I've ever worked when it comes to celebration cakes. First, I'm glad that woman got that wedding annulled, and I hope she has found someone she can be happy with. Second, all you people trying to call out a baker, I've worked in a bakery. You have no idea what goes into all the baked goods you love, so cool your jets. Story 15. When the bride and groom argued over why the groom's mother shouldn't get all money given to them on their wedding day. Yeah, that was a red flag. Story 16. Worked at wedding receptions. Here are some favorites. Bride started stripping on the table while the groom was outside. Bride and best man had intercourse in the closet. Bride lost her ring less than 3 hours after being married. Mother of the groom lit the table on fire because she didn't like the bride or her family. Groom was passed out drunk less than 30 minutes into the reception. He pre-gamed in the limo. Our bartender refused to serve him when he arrived. Groomsmen loaded him back into the limo to sleep it off, and he didn't come back that night. Story 17. Photographing the groom and you see his eyes light up when a guest arrives. You look over and it's a cute woman in a short dress. He smiles, walks up to the woman, picks her up, and swings her in his arms. Best smile I captured of the groom all day. Marriage didn't last 6 months from what I've heard. Story 18. Not sure if this belongs here since I'm really sure that they got divorced after, but anyway, I was helping out at my parents' restaurant when a huge wedding party was hosted. I was busy serving drinks and suddenly loud yelling and screaming started right behind me. Turns out the bride had somehow found out that the groom had hooked up with her sister right before the wedding ceremony, and apparently on a few occasions before. And in her anger, she stabbed him in the chest with a dinner fork several times. We had to call an ambulance and the police. It was like hell. Edit. I didn't expect this story to blow up that much, but since a bunch of people asked, I just called my mom and asked about this story, and apparently the former bride's parents are still regular guests at my parents' restaurant. Not for weddings, though. And according to my mother, they told that the groom and bride's sister now actually have 2 children together and are planning on getting married, but had to cancel their wedding multiple times due to COVID-19. Edit 2. Since a bunch of people asked, no, I don't know what happened to the bride or how she and her family get along now, and neither does my mom. I don't think she went to jail for this, though. She probably got sentenced to a fine or probation. The story takes place in Germany. She probably got sentenced in accordance with Section 224 IS2 JB AK dangerous bodily harm. If you all think for 1 minute that I'm dedicated enough to look up how to read out those codes from the German legal documents, you are sorely mistaken. You're lucky I read them like I did and didn't just make fart sounds for a few seconds. Story 19. I had a buddy who put himself through grad school playing violin at weddings. He said there were several that everybody knew it was the wrong choice. He said you could see in their eyes and how they walked. Story 20. I used to drive a limo and did a few weddings. This one Saturday afternoon, I am picking up both bride and groom, best man, and maid of honor. Poor groom has his arm in a full cast and immobilized with a steel rod. Turns out he had shattered it a week earlier while riding an ATV. They all get in the car and the bride-to-be starts dragging him hardcore, telling him he is such an idiot, he has ruined the wedding, he is such a loser. She is not letting up and not letting go. Obviously, she knew about the injury, so it wasn't a surprise. She was just using it to drop F-bombs and other unwholesome words in his general direction. I pull up to the church, and she and the maid of honor leap out and go into the church. The best man asks if he still wants to go through with the wedding, and the poor dumb schmuck says yes with the enthusiasm of a sleepy sloth. I just wanted to say, no, dude, don't spend the next few years with that witch. But he was getting out of the car by then. I don't know how it turned out, but I am sure it wasn't good. Story 21. It was the 3rd time the bride had hired me, and all the guys had been carbon copies. Story 22. I don't work in the wedding industry, but I have a depressing wedding story. I have a friend who I grew up with. She was always gorgeous and incredibly popular with guys, and I always thought she was a great person. As I got older, I came to realize she was actually extremely toxic in relationships and did better when she was single. She'd been seeing a new guy for 2 months when one day I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Knowing her history, it was a massive red flag for me. I turn up to the wedding, and it's at a gorgeous little backyard-type wedding. It's spring, and everything looks perfect. I greet her family, and it's like I've turned up to a funeral, not a wedding. They're all extremely solemn, and when I ask about the groom, her mother rolls her eyes and says, "This is a mistake." Wedding commences, and as the bride comes down the aisle, her face is gray and like she would rather be anywhere else. They exchange vows while the bride does everything in her power to not touch her husband-to-be, even standing a solid meter away from him as they stand at the front. She actually cringes and looks away when he gets choked up, saying how much he loves her. When the priest announces the kiss, the bride takes a slow step forward and presents her cheek for him to kiss instead of her lips. No one cheers. It's just an awkward shuffling of feet and a few scattered claps. It was the worst wedding I've ever been to. They lasted about 3 months before separating. Story 23. Wedding DJ here. Had a wedding a few years ago where the groom was a total D-head. When it was his turn to make a speech, he refused to make one. The bride's sister begged him to please make a speech or at least just tell the bride she looks beautiful. He got up, took the mic, and mumbled to her that she looks beautiful and sat back down. When I left after the wedding was done, I was walking to my van with some gear, and then I saw the bride sitting one side crying. Found out a few days later that the groom hit her 3 days before the wedding, and he tried to hit her at the wedding again when she asked him to not drink so much and pace himself. That's just sad. Story 24. Night before the wedding, the bride-to-be tries to sleep with me on her stag night, crying on my shoulder that she wasn't ready for marriage. Even my 18-year-old hormonal brain did a big nope there. They lasted a year. Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day. Story 25. My wife has been a wedding photographer, and I've helped her out from time to time. One of the first weddings we did, I got this really trashy vibe off the bride. I couldn't quite place my finger on what specifically set it off, but if I had to guess, I would probably pin it on my extended family, many of whom could be extras in Deliverance. I just ended up with a sixth sense of these things. I told my then-girlfriend, now wife, that I don't think they're going to last very long. Sure enough, a few months later, my wife is contacted by the mother of the bride for the wedding photo. She asked why the bride didn't contact her about it, and she's tried to reach her a few times, and the mother just said she's been indisposed for a bit, and if she could just send the photos to her. I get into Google Foo mode and look up the bride, and after a bit of digging, find an arrest report for 3 days after the wedding from Florida where they honeymooned. She was arrested for publicly assaulting her new husband while drunk and putting him in the hospital. Story 26. At a wedding, when the I-do's came, the groom said, "I guess." Story 27. They had a big fight the night before the wedding and were considering calling it off. Until the bride showed up 30 minutes before the ceremony, no one was sure if she would be there at all. The groom danced with his mom more times than he did with the bride. The bride was snippy and nitpicky with the staff all night. The word annulment was cast around, and I hope to God they went through with it the next day because holy crap. Story 28. Yes, as the filmmaker, my entire job was centered around capturing shared moments of emotion and chemistry. These are what make it into the edit. These are what make your wedding film amazing. But when you realize you have almost no chemistry to capture, it becomes clear that the edit is going to lack the magic that is, love. I can tell you of 2 experiences that I know of. One, the couple treated the wedding like a bachelor party and only hung out with their respective circles. The groom, drinking and laughing loudly amidst his drunk old men, was not a good vibe, a very hostile table. The kicker? They each got their own photographers and filmmakers. Eventually, their conflict became our conflict. They divorced very shortly after. 2. A political celebrity wedding. They didn't care about my camera crew, and instead, they invited and treated the paparazzi cameras as priority. My main cam guy had to argue with security to get the shots we needed. They essentially cared more about the next day front page and glamour magazines than their memories. The guy was also known for corruption, and there was an incident where his lover arrived and made a scene. I just Googled them now, and I see they are publicly fighting each other in the news. She says he watches too much adult entertainment on a TV interview, then he had her arrested last week. Wow! The rest of the weddings, however, were incredibly amazing. As a young 20-something kid who never traveled the world yet, filming weddings of different cultures was like getting a taste of culture, from crazy long but colorful Indian weddings to African weddings in nature, breaking plates at Greek weddings. I learned lots, then moved on. I did some filming at a wedding for a friend back in my 20s, and it was a ton of fun, but it was also a really great wedding. I thought about trying to put together a video business in my 20s and getting into that work full time, but after hearing about the bad weddings, I feel a little less regret having let that opportunity pass me by. Story 29. I'm a photographer and I've shot 3 weddings because I hate them and they are not for me. Bless you guys who do it, but it's too much work and drama for me and not worth the money. Anyway, one of the weddings, the groom called the bride unattractive. She was stunning and used to model, was maybe a size 2, and he was cute but generic cute. He kept taking shots of vodka with his boys and asked for a full-on photo shoot with his mom. He was definitely a mama's boy because mom was hovering, but you know it's bad when mom suggests that he maybe take some photos with his wife. He told me to shut the F up every time I redirected, so after the third time that happened and he flashed me his junk, I started packing up. When he started yelling at me, I just told him no one talks to me like that, but I'd send them a refund. I knew right then that it wouldn't last. He started crying and said he'd behave. He did, but it didn't matter because 2 weeks later, the marriage was annulled. No one wanted the photos. I was paid in full for photos no one wanted. Bride's dad had paid me and tipped me well too. When I offered to refund him half, he said the bride knew when the groom yelled at me and cried that it wasn't going to work, so I earned it. I guess the whole fam was trying to get them to call it off. Story 30. It's sad reading so many of these replies and realizing most of these couples probably weren't even friends to each other. Edit. Didn't expect so many responses. Thanks for sharing. I always love a good thread. Honestly, though, some of these made me realize how lucky I am to have found my favorite person. Now I hope you'll find yours soon if you haven't already. Story 31. I perform ceremonies as an officiant and know other officiants. The worst, in my opinion, are the weddings that are just a bad idea. The couple is young, inexperienced, and selfish. I mean, even courthouse weddings can last decades, but if you have a wedding that is clearly not planned out, they are often not thought out as well. Weddings that are rebellious as a F you, daddy, I'm 19 and marry who I want. I give about 2 years, especially if the bride and groom are out of sync with one another. Or one just looks like this was the other's idea primarily. Oddly enough, weddings with cheesy themes, Star Wars, Elvis, etc., last longer than the traditional styles. I have theories on that, but don't have enough data that's not anecdotal to back it up. But I think casual weddings where everyone is relaxed, happy, and having a good time because the wedding is about celebrating rather than ceremony will last the longest. A sense of humor helps. If both the bride and groom are relaxed and silly with one another, those last the longest. Honestly, it feels nice to read about positive weddings that last after all the stuff we've read thus far. Thank you, fellow wedding officiant. Yeah, folks, that's right. Mainly Facts Guy is a registered officiant in the state of Minnesota and has officiated 2 weddings already. Story 32. A few times as a photographer, the couple were usually fine, but the families themselves were too different and combative. Heard from a friend who did calligraphy that a bride came to get wedding invites and the usual wording of bride's mom and dad and groom's mom and dad invite you to the wedding of bride and groom. The bride didn't want the groom's parents' names on the invite. My mate did an invite mock-up and called the couple for a check, and the groom lost it because the groom's parents were the ones paying for most of the wedding. They didn't need any invites. Story 33. I worked at a hotel in the kitchen. We did a trashy wedding where the cake was brought in from Walmart, the groom was caught making out with a bridesmaid in a conference room, and we saw the bride throw her ring into a storm drain across the street. You think that's trashy? There may or may not have been a wedding in my extended family held in a nicer hotel banquet room where all they provided for food at the reception was, I kid you not, some 2 liters of soda and a few blocks of cheese and crackers. Not fancy cheese, I'm talking some bricks of Kraft and some Ritz. Would have killed for some Walmart sheet cake. Story 33. Yes, I'm a wedding photographer and think this often when I'm at the rehearsal, and they often have nasty arguments over small details. Story 35. Used to serve at a lot of weddings. At one very expensive engagement party, the groom got drunk and tried to pick a fight with one of the servers. He then punched another guest and had to be walked out. Bride seemed upset, but not shocked. Story 36. I used to work at a popular wedding venue. Bride and groom came in the day before for rehearsal, checked the decorations, and played a sweet video for the couple. Standard wedding bullcrap. Next day, the bride and groom arrived fighting the entire time until reception, where the groom proceeded to drink himself blind before speeches and had to be carried out. Didn't even get to play that video. It was the best crap ever. Got to go home early and take home a bunch of food already paid for. Story 37. I worked for a catering company. I knew they were going to get a divorce as soon as the bride started grinding on the best man when the groom was puking his guts out in the corner. Story 38. I thought this thread might have some fun stories. Turns out they're just sad. Story 39. Oh yeah, definitely. Ceremony is coming up, but the groom is nowhere to be found. Everyone is looking for him. We look in the groom's lounge, hangout room where the groom and groomsmen hang out. There he is, banging the maid of honor. Shame, shame, shame. Story 40. What's the deal with many answers talking about the bride effing the best man? Why would the bride suddenly find the groom's brother/best friend irresistible on the wedding day? And what kind of sick people F their friend's fiancé on the wedding day? Story 41. My background is in marriage and family therapy, and I work at a wedding venue now. There have been many times that I thought a couple is destined for future therapy, if not divorce. Essentially, when I see the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse as described by Gottman: criticism, contempt, defensiveness, or stonewalling. I also assume that things won't end well when either the bride or groom is a big bully towards me or the other vendors. It just makes me feel bad for the future spouse. But we don't tend to hear much from the couples once they are married, so I usually don't know how things end up down the road. Story 42. Yes, one of my brides was nervous and got so drunk before the ceremony that she had to be helped down the aisle. Then, when the ceremony was over, instead of kissing the groom, we now pronounce you man and wife, she licked him from chin to eyeball. She fell during the recession and knocked over a waiter carrying champagne. She couldn't be in their post-ceremony photo shoot because she kept falling. When it was time to cut the cake, we couldn't find her. Our staff went to her hotel room and found her covered in her own vomit, still in her wedding dress. She had the audacity to ask for a refund after all of this. They're divorced now. Edited to note, this was a symbolic ceremony and they were legally married beforehand. Overall, the situation was quite sad. Story 43. I've been the DJ at a few hundred weddings. There was drama at most of them in some way. One in particular broke out into an old-school saloon-style fight like in the old Western movies. I'm pretty sure that one didn't last. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.